Hello everyone and welcome to another video. My name is Lizzie and today we're going to be continuing to celebrate the UK's LGBT History Month with some LGBTQ plus classics. Last week I gave you some recommendations for my favourite historical fiction, so books written recently about the past that included LGBTQ plus people, storylines, themes, etc. Today we're talking books from the past, most of which were written by LGBTQ plus writers and are a wonderful contribution to LGBT History Month, and most of them I think are British authors as well. So UK LGBT History Month. Not all of them, but most of them. As with before, I will put some spoilers in the description as to whether the characters have a happy ending with regards to the queer aspects of the storyline. Sometimes we want joyful escapism. Sometimes we want historical truth. Unfortunately, with queer history, those two things aren't always, they can't always coexist. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So I will put in the description any kind of spoilers as to the tone and emotional result of the story. But without any further ado, let's get into the books. I feel like most people will have heard of some of these books, but hopefully there are some new books for you here as well. First of all, I had to mention this, of course, Orlando by Virginia Woolf. And this is actually the only Virginia Woolf I've read, apart from A Room of One's Own. I have read that, but I haven't really got on with the rest of her fiction, but I listened to the audiobook of this and really enjoyed it. And Orlando is an immortal, gender-changing hero based on Virginia Woolf's own lover, Victoria Sackville West. The story is essentially a biography of this fictional figure who lives from Tudor times through to what was modern day, so the early 20th century, and their various adventures as a man and as a woman. This is a staple in the queer canon of classics and is no surprise why, really. It's hilarious and insightful and sort of deep at times, and just it's exactly what you would want for a story about a gender-bending hero. Next up, and this is one of my favourite books of all time, A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. This is a very short book and it's a day in the life of a recently bereaved man in the 1960s in California. His partner has recently passed away and he's dealing with his own grief, the fact that he wasn't able to go to the funeral, he wasn't even invited to the funeral, his sort of detachment from his partner's family, and all of the things that you would expect him to be going through, quite frankly, when you're recovering from the death of a loved one. This book is beautifully written. Every single sentence is so perfectly crafted, and it's an absolute, it's a joy to read in that the writing is beautiful. It is also heartbreaking and very emotional and a sort of meditation on the human condition, while also being so mundane at the same time, and I love it so much. Also, I have seen the film for this one and the film is very, very good. Would highly recommend the film as well. The next one is another very famous one, and that is Maurice by E.M. Forster. This was actually written in the early 20th century but was published posthumously in the 1970s, and has, I mean, the dedication at the start of this book is to a happier year, which just sums up, I think, what E.M. Forster was trying to do with this novel. The main character is, of course, Maurice, and he starts off the book as a teenage boy, and it follows his sort of youth and his passions and love affairs and the men that he falls in love with and their lives, and it is a love letter of truth and optimism and hope for a happier year, which thankfully did come, and it was able to be published years after his death. Again, this book it's brilliant. It's truly phenomenal. It's my favourite of E.M. Forster's works because you can just tell that it comes from such a place of truth and of hope, and it's glorious. I really, really love this book. And now for something completely different. Carmilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This is a vampiric gothic novella about lesbian vampires in Austria in, I guess, 19th century. This book predates Dracula, and a lot of the tropes and things that we associate with vampires are from this book. So the main character is Laura, who is a young woman who is living in this mysterious castle in the Austrian forest. A mysterious young woman is found after a carriage crash and brought into their care, and she has her eyes on Laura. This is one I reread very recently and I loved it. It's so good, it's so creepy, and such a great addition to the gothic genre and the vampire genre, as well as the queer fiction genre. There's also a great web series, which is how I first got into this book, that I really enjoyed. In the style of Lizzie Bennet Diaries, this has its own kind of modern day vlog style web series, which is just so much fun. So if something more gothic is up your alley, this is definitely one to check out. The last one for the main part of the recommendations is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I wasn't sure about including this book on this list, but I think it deserves its place here, and I think it's underrated as a piece of queer-themed classic literature. This is a science fiction novel that takes place in the future where humans have scattered all over the universe and sort of evolved on their own planet. So they're slightly different on different planets, different cultures, and different biological aspects to cultures on different planets. The story follows an anthropologist who visits a planet where there is no concept of gender or biological sex or anything. Everyone is physically the same most of the time, and they don't have any distinction between genders at all. It's an examination on our own views of gender roles and follows the main character's journey as he comes to realise how much he has so many preconceptions about gender, and also that his feelings towards other people aren't as gendered as he had thought. If you're a speculative science fiction sort of person, if, like me, you enjoy the sort of science fiction that explores anthropological ideas, then this is definitely one to go for. I'm really excited to read the rest of the series. It's a series of books all set in different worlds, so each book is about a different culture and community, and I think that's just such an amazing idea and approach to a science fiction series. As always, I'm going to finish off with 3 books from my TBR that fit into this general theme. And so first of all, we have Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone by James Baldwin. I have never read any James Baldwin. I'm very excited to read some James Baldwin. I've mentioned this on like 3 different videos as part of my TBR so far, so I do really need to get to it. I think one of the common themes through a lot of James Baldwin's books is gender and sexuality and oppression, and people exploring their own identity within that. So I'm really looking forward to reading it. I think it's going to be... I've heard only good things, so I'm very optimistic. Now, in case you were thinking, Lizzie, how are you making a video on LGBTQ plus classics without mentioning Oscar Wilde? Here he is. So I didn't mention Dorian Gray on this list. I probably should have. I didn't. I don't know why. But I do have on my TBR De Profundis, which is the letter that Oscar Wilde wrote to his lover from prison. I know it will be amazingly written because it's Oscar Wilde. I know it will be very insightful as to humanity because it's Oscar Wilde. I know that it will also be a very emotional read, just because of the circumstances under which it was written. But I am looking forward to reading this. Unlike the other books on this list, which are all sort of fiction stories, this one is more of a historical document. So I think from that perspective, it's going to be a little bit different than what I usually go for. And lastly, some more Isherwood, the Berlin novels. And these are the books that the musical Cabaret was based on. So it is astonishing to me that I haven't read them. It's a collection of 2 books. I think they are Mr. Norris Changes Trains and Goodbye to Berlin. They're both set in the early to mid 1930s in Berlin. Now, 1930s Berlin, prior to what unfortunately Germany is famous for in the 1930s, was surprisingly liberal and very much on the forefront of equality when it came to sexuality and gender. They were very much leading the way. There was a big subculture there, a lot of scientific research was happening there. So it's a fascinating, very short but fascinating period between the wars where this incredibly liberal front was happening in Berlin, and we all know how it ended, unfortunately. So it's going to be an interesting snapshot into that era, because I think it is also semi-autobiographical. I'm pretty sure that Isherwood lived in Berlin during that era, so there is an autobiographical element, and again is sort of about that subculture and underworld that we see in Cabaret. So there we have it, some recommendations of some classics for you that all feature in some way LGBTQ plus themes, characters, plots, etc, etc, etc. If you have any recommendations for me, then please let me know. I'm always looking for more books to read. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!